For 12 years, I measured my worth in silence. The silence of withheld approval, of dismissive sighs, of conversations that died when I entered the room. My marriage to Daniel was a masterclass in quiet degradation. He wasn't a tyrant, he was a curator of my inadequacy. A successful financial strategist, he wielded logic like a scalpel, dissecting my dreams, my career, my very personality, until only his assessment remained. Impractical, emotional, a lovely but ultimately decorative burden. My crime, it seemed, was my career as a ceramicist. To him, my studio was a charming hobby. My sales at local galleries were pin money. The years I spent building a following, the clay under my nails, the kiln I'd saved for 3 years to buy, all of it was reduced to a whimsical distraction from the real business of life, which he managed. He handled our finances with the stern benevolence of a trustee. I had an allowance. I was added as an authorized user to credit cards he monitored. The house, the cars, the investments, all were in his name for tax efficiency and protection. I trusted him. He was the expert. I was the artist. The first crack in this carefully constructed reality came from a place of genuine love, my younger sister, Chloe. She was getting married, not to a hedge fund manager, but to a warm, funny teacher. They were saving for a modest house. For her wedding gift, I wanted to make them something monumental, a full dining set, hand-thrown, glazed in the deep cobalt blue she'd loved since we were kids. It would take me months. It would be my masterpiece. I told Daniel over dinner, my voice tinged with excited pride. It's for Chloe's wedding, a full set. I've already sourced the perfect clay. It's going to be stunning. He set down his fork with a precise click. Claire, be realistic. You'll tie up the studio for a quarter. The material cost alone. And for what? A gift they'll chip in a year? He wiped his mouth. Write a check, a generous one, from our joint account. It's more practical. They can buy what they actually need. The dismissal was so complete, so sterile, it stole my breath. It's not about the money. It's about me, my hands, my love for her. Sentiment doesn't pay property taxes, he said, not unkindly, as if explaining basic arithmetic to a child. Your time has an opportunity cost. You could be developing new inventory for the fall season. This is poor resource allocation. That night, lying beside his sleeping form, I felt a new alien emotion. Not hurt, but a cold, clarifying fury. He had quantified my love for my sister and found it wanting. He had assessed my art and deemed it a poor investment. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt unseen. And being unseen is a form of camouflage. The next day, I didn't argue. I smiled. You're right, of course, a check is smarter. I saw the faint satisfaction in his eyes. Another problem efficiently solved. He had won. He always won. But I had made a decision. I would make the set for Chloe, and I would pay for it myself, not with my allowance, but with money he didn't know existed. It started as a small rebellion, a secret garden. A client from a gallery wired a payment to an old, forgotten PayPal account I'd had from college, one not linked to our joint life. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I used it to buy the clay, the special cobalt oxide. Working on the pieces late at night, I felt a thrill of defiance. This was my resource, my allocation. To fund it further, I took on a few private commissions, mentioned only as custom orders to Daniel. The money trickled into my secret account. It was pathetically small in the scheme of his portfolio, but to me, it was a fortress. Daniel's control had an ironic flaw, his arrogance. Because he considered my financial intellect negligible, he was careless. He left statements open on his desk.
He took calls on speakerphone about leveraged assets and shell company distributions while I pretended to read nearby. I started listening, not with understanding at first, but with a desperate need to decode the system that held me captive. The language of finance, once intimidating, began to reveal its patterns. I bought books. I took a free online course in accounting under the guise of managing my studio better. I started cross-referencing the casual remarks he'd drop with the numbers on the statements he'd left out. A discrepancy emerged, tiny at first. A mention of rental income from a commercial property I'd never heard of. A line item for management fees paid to an LLC with a name that was an anagram of his own. The slow, chilling realization was this: Daniel wasn't just controlling our money, he was systematically separating it. He was building a financial lifeboat, and I was not on the passenger manifest.
The discovery didn't fill me with panic. It filled me with a terrifying, icy focus. My secret PayPal account was a child's piggy bank compared to the architecture of concealment he was building. I needed to learn. I needed to become an expert in the very thing he believed I was too simple to grasp. My studio became my war room. Beneath sketches of vases and bowls, I now hid spreadsheets. I learned about offshore holdings, domestic trusts, and the art of titling assets. I started a physical journal, written in a shorthand I invented, disguised amidst my glaze calculations. I noted every property address I overheard, every company name, every offhand mention of a partner or silent investment. I began to perform a role with an artistry that dwarfed my pottery. I was the slightly scatterbrained, creatively obsessed wife. I'd forget to deposit my small gallery checks, leaving them for him to handle with a patient sigh, while the real payments went to my digital vault. I'd ask him naive questions about the stock market over dinner, nodding blankly as he lectured, secretly filing away every term to research later. My greatest ally was his condescension. Because he saw me as a non-threat, he was lax. His laptop, password protected with a complex string, was often left open when he stepped away for a call. One day, my heart hammering against my ribs, I quickly inserted a USB drive a cybersecurity-savvy client had once given me as a gift, loaded with a data-scraping program. It took 90 seconds. When he returned, I was innocently sketching a bowl's curvature. That drive, later unlocked in my studio, became a Rosetta Stone. Folders of encrypted financials, spreadsheets of holdings, and a master list of passwords saved in a file named, with breathtaking arrogance, Fortress. I didn't touch anything. I just copied. I became a ghost in his machine, a silent shadow in the fortress he was so proudly building. All the while, my own secret project flourished. Chloe's wedding set was complete, 12 place settings, serving platters, a monumental centerpiece bowl. They were breathtaking. The cobalt glaze was a depth of blue you could drown in, each piece unique but harmonious. They represented not just my love for her, but every silent hour of my rebellion, every ounce of dignity I'd reclaimed in the dark. I presented them to Chloe and her fiancé, Mark, at a private family dinner. Their tears, their stunned joy were a balm I hadn't known I needed. "Claire, this is a legacy," Chloe whispered, her hand trembling over a plate. Daniel sat beside me, smiling a tight, polite smile. He gave a brief, patronizing speech about family and craftsmanship, his words empty calories. I saw the calculation in his eyes, the M&I hours, the material cost, the opportunity cost. He saw an expensive, sentimental gesture. He didn't see the cathedral I had built inside myself while making it. Later that night,
The mask slipped. As we got ready for bed, he said, "The set was adequate, Claire, but really, was it worth the studio time for the last 6 months? The Bennett project could have used that focus. Their retainer would have covered 10 times the cost of that clay." Adequate. The word was a spark in a room filled with gas. All the cold fury, the months of silent study, the pain of being quantified rose in my throat, but I didn't let it out. I turned to him, my face a calm mask. "You're right," I said, my voice flat. "It was a poor allocation. I won't make that mistake again." He nodded, satisfied, and turned out his light. In the darkness, I lay awake, not with tears, but with a finalized plan crystallizing in my mind. The mistake I wouldn't make again was trusting him. The resource I was reallocating was myself. He had taught me, in his way, to think strategically, to assess value, to build a fortress, so I would. His greatest error wasn't in hiding money, it was in believing that the quiet, decorative wife he'd placed on a shelf didn't have the patience, the intelligence, or the will to learn how to dismantle the entire house, brick by hidden brick. The dinner with Chloe wasn't the end of my secret life. It was the end of the beginning. I now had the knowledge, a small but growing independent fund, and, for the first time, a clear, cold purpose. He had built a fortress to protect himself from a future without me. I would become the siege engine he never saw coming.
My rebellion ceased to be a secret garden and became a covert operation. The data I'd extracted from Daniel's fortress file was my map into a shadow country, a network of LLCs, offshore holdings in the Cayman Islands, and a trust in Delaware that held the title to the commercial property he'd once mentioned. The most revealing detail wasn't the wealth, but the timeline. The systematic transfer of assets into these shielded entities had begun almost 4 years ago, long before any marital discord he could point to. This wasn't reaction, it was a long-term, premeditated strategy. I hired someone. Not a lawyer, not yet. That would leave a paper trail. I used my secret funds to retain a discreet ex-military private investigator named Gareth, recommended by a gallery owner who'd been through her own nasty divorce. I met him in a quiet corner of a public library, not my studio. I provided him with the list of entities and addresses from the data. "I need to know everything about these," I said, sliding a flash drive across the table. "Who manages them, who benefits, their current value, and I need absolute discretion." Gareth, a man of few words, nodded. "He have any idea?" "I thinks I'm counting Blaze recipes." A ghost of a smile touched Gareth's lips. "Good." While Gareth worked, I performed my domestic role to perfection. I listened to Daniel's monologues about market volatility with wide, uncomprehending eyes. I asked if we should buy some of that Bitcoin, which made him chuckle and pat my hand. "Leave the grown-up investing to me, Claire." I cooked his favorite meals. The more invisible I made myself, the more invisible my own actions became. Gareth's reports arrived in encrypted emails. They confirmed and expanded the horrifying, impressive scope of Daniel's financial segregation. The Delaware Trust was the crown jewel, holding assets valued at nearly $3 million. It was structured to be divorce-proof. The beneficiary was listed as a charitable foundation, which, upon Gareth's bidding, was a pass-through entity ultimately controlled by, you guessed it, Daniel himself. It was a Matryoshka doll of obfuscation. But Gareth found a flaw, a single, beautiful flaw. To fund the trust and the LLCs, Daniel had been using lines of credit against our jointly owned marital home.
the home he'd so benevolently put in his name for protection. He'd been leveraging our shared equity to build his private fortress. It was a form of hidden dissipation of marital assets. Legally, it was a gold mine. Armed with this, I finally went to a lawyer. Not a bulldog celebrity divorce attorney, but a sharp, meticulous woman named Aris Thorne, who specialized in untangling high-net-worth financial fraud. In her calm, plant-filled office, I laid it all out: the data, Gareth's findings, the timeline, the secret PayPal account, the journal. Aris listened without interruption, her fingers steepled. When she finished, she was silent for a full minute. "Mrs. Evans, Claire, this is one of the most meticulously documented cases of financial concealment I've ever seen walk into my office. He's going to claim you weren't interested, that you didn't understand. I have my glaze calculation journal for the last 2 years. Every third entry is a notation of a financial discrepancy I heard or found, dated. It shows sustained pattern recognition. It proves I was paying attention, even if he thought I wasn't." Aris's eyebrows rose. "That's not just documentation, that's a narrative. It's perfect." She laid out the strategy. We would not confront him yet. We would use my position of perceived weakness to let him grow more confident, potentially more reckless. Meanwhile, she would begin the quiet legal process of subpoenaing records from the banks and institutions behind his entities, using my data as the roadmap. The goal was not to tip him off until we could file for divorce and immediately file a motion for a forensic accounting and a temporary freezing of all assets, including the hidden ones. The day I signed the retainer with Aris, paid from my secret funds, I felt a seismic shift. I was no longer just gathering intelligence. I had declared war. The siege engine was built and loaded. Daniel, oblivious, brought his own downfall closer. He announced over wine one evening that he was considering a strategic personal restructuring that might involve spending more time at the firm's Singapore office. It was couched in terms of career opportunity, but I heard the subtext. He was preparing the geographic ground for separation. He was testing the waters. "Singapore," I said, tilting my head with feigned, naive concern. "That sounds lonely. Would it be for very long?" "Perhaps permanently," he said, watching my reaction closely. "The tax advantages alone are compelling. We'd have to think about what that means for us." We. The word was a lie. He'd already thought, for years. I let my face fall just slightly. "Oh, I'd miss you. And my studio is here." I perfectly played the part of the clingy, simple wife worried about her hobby. He reached over, his touch condescending. "We'll work it out. You might even find inspiration there." The dismissal was final. In his mind, the decision was made. He saw my sadness as an obstacle to be managed, not a feeling to be considered. That night,
The hammer
I
fell on
emailed
a Tuesday
Aris
morning.
one word.
Daniel had
Soon.
left for what he called a critical off-site strategic meeting. I knew from a credit card statement I'd seen that he'd actually booked a weekend at a secluded luxury resort in Napa Valley. The reservation was for 2. I didn't need Gareth to tell me who the other guest was. A name had appeared in his call logs with increasing frequency: Anya, a junior associate at his firm. While he was in his meeting, I was in Aris Thorne's office, signing the final documents. We filed for divorce on grounds of irreconcilable differences and, concurrently, a motion for a temporary restraining order freezing all marital assets, a list of which included every shell company, trust, and offshore account we had identified. The motion was supported by a 200-page exhibit of financial analysis, timelines, and my journal entries, all meticulously organized to tell the story of systematic financial concealment. Aris served Daniel's firm and his personal lawyer at noon. At 2:17 p.m.,
My phone started to ring. I watched it light up on my studio table next to a vase I was trimming. Daniel's name flashed again and again. I let it go to voicemail. After the 7th call, a text came through. "Claire, we need to talk, urgently. There's been a misunderstanding." I picked up the phone and typed back, my hand steady. "I'm in the middle of a firing. Glaze can't wait. We'll talk tonight." Then I turned my phone off. I arrived home at my usual time. He was already there, pacing the living room, his tie loose, his face ashen. The veneer of calm control was shattered. On the glass coffee table lay the thick stack of legal papers. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and panic. "What have you done?" I set my bag down calmly. "It seems clear, Daniel. I've filed for divorce." This is insanity. These allegations, they're lies. Where did you even get this information? This is private." "From you," I said, my voice even. "You left it all lying around. On your desk, on your computer. You told me about it, thinking I was too stupid to understand. Tax efficiency, asset protection. I just started connecting the dots." He stared at me as if seeing a stranger. You spied on me? You hacked my computer?" "I accessed marital property to understand our financial situation. Given that you'd taken it upon yourself to hide most of it, I had no other choice. I used his language, cold, logical. This is going to be thrown out. This is illegal. You have no idea what you're doing." He was sputtering, a far cry from the master strategist. "My lawyer, Eris Forn, seems to think otherwise. The judge already granted the temporary freeze this afternoon. The Fortress file was particularly helpful. By the way, naming it that was a bit on the nose." At the mention of the file name, all the blood drained from his face. He understood then. I hadn't just stumbled upon a few statements. I had the blueprint. He sank onto the sofa, the papers crinkling beneath him. "Claire, why? Why would you do this? We could have talked." I laughed then, a short, dry sound with no humor. "Talked? When? When you were quantifying the love I poured into my sister's wedding gift as a poor resource allocation? When you were explaining to me for the 1,000th time that my dreams were impractical? You didn't want a partner, Daniel. You wanted an audience. And then you wanted to leave that audience behind, penniless, while you sailed off to Singapore with your hidden millions." "It wasn't like that," he whispered, but the fight was gone. He was cornered, and he knew it. "It was exactly like that. And now you'll get to explain to a judge why you thought leveraging our home to fund your secret trusts was a good allocation of our marital resources." The legal process that followed was a brutal, methodical dismantling. Eris was a maestro. Daniel's lawyers fought back, claiming I was a gold digger, that I had no head for finances and was misunderstanding complex but legitimate strategies. But my journal, with its dated entries linking his comments to the hidden assets, was the key. It proved knowledge, pattern, and intent. The judge was not amused. Daniel was found to have engaged in the deliberate dissipation and concealment of marital assets. The result was not a typical 50-50 split. It was a punitive reallocation. I was awarded the marital home, free and clear. He had to sign over the deed to settle the debt he'd incurred against it. The trusts and LLCs were pierced. I received 65% of the total marital estate, including a substantial lump sum from the liquidated Fortress assets, plus spousal support for a period of years. The final hearing was quiet. Daniel looked hollowed out. The financial strategist had been out-strategized. As we left the courthouse, he stopped me on the steps. "You played the long game," he said, his voice flat. "You sat there for years pretending to be less than you were, just to do this." I looked at him, this man I had once loved, who had spent years making me feel small. I didn't pretend to be less, Daniel. You just never bothered to look for more. You taught me that every resource has a value and a purpose. You just never thought I'd learn to apply that lesson to you. I turned and walked to my car, a sensible, reliable model I'd bought with my own money after moving out. I didn't look back. I used part of the settlement to buy a new studio, a sprawling, sun-drenched space in an artists' cooperative. I hired an assistant. My work, once a hobby, now commanded prices that would have made Daniel's head spin. The vase I was trimming the day the papers were served, I finished it. It's called Fortress. It's tall, elegant, and seemingly solid, but if you look closely, you can see a fine, intricate crack running from top to bottom, glazed in pure gold, the Japanese art of kintsugi, making the broken place more beautiful for having been broken. Chloe and Mark use their cobalt blue set every Sunday. They just had a baby. I'm her godmother. Daniel moved to Singapore anyway, but the whispers followed him. The scandal of the case cost him at his firm. He's still there, but I hear his trajectory has flattened. Sometimes in the deep quiet of my studio, I think about those 12 years. I don't miss him. I miss the person I was before I learned to be silent. But I've rebuilt her, piece by piece, with patience and fire. The silence I live in now is my own, and it's full of the most beautiful, resonant sound, the quiet, steady hum of a life built on my own terms.